The man who claimed he was sex trafficked by Sean Combs, paraded around a party where multiple celebrities were allegedly present, and then assaulted, has now dropped two big names from his lawsuit: Jay-Z and Beyoncé. While other big names remain in the suit, why were references to these two A-listers purposely omitted in a newly amended complaint?
Diddy's world just collapsed. And it didn't start with a judge, a jury, a lawyer, or a leaked file. It started with Beyoncé.
Party where he was then sexually assaulted, forced to partake in unwanted sex acts. And while he listed a lot of high-profile names in this lawsuit, not necessarily as defendants, but as people who were at this party, that he claims, by the way, was held at a property owned by Emilio and Gloria Estefan in Miami and then taken by a secret tunnel to Sean Combs' property. The complaint that was filed at the beginning of the month read, high-profile individuals including Jacob Arabo, Jacob the jeweler, Jay-Z, Gloria Estefan, LeBron James, and Beyoncé Knowles Carter are identified as witnesses due to their presence or knowledge of the events surrounding the freak-off orchestrated by defendant Diddy. You know, a freak-off has been described so many times in different lawsuits and the indictments, but here's the thing. In a newly amended complaint, Manzaro has dropped Jay-Z and Beyoncé's names. And that is really interesting because here's the thing, what did Manzaro allege in the prior complaint? Quote, upon regaining partial consciousness, the plaintiff found himself inside a large party area upon information and belief that it was Diddy's son's birthday party. Jay-Z and Beyoncé Knowles Carter were seated in the room, and upon seeing plaintiff, Beyoncé Knowles Carter asked, "What's this? What's this all about? Why is this half-naked white man with a blank mask standing here in front of me?" Defendant Eric, this is Eric Mejias, responded, "Diddy wants him to see what we do to snitches. This is part of his punishment." Plaintiff was forcibly paraded through multiple rooms filled with people who were jeering and taunting him. Defendant Diddy explicitly ordered plaintiff's degradation, saying, "He's going to find out what we do to snitches tonight. Get him undressed." But now, in a newly amended complaint, Jay-Z and Beyoncé, no sign of their names. Their names are dropped. Their names don't appear anywhere. Why? Well, there's no official stated reason, but according to page 6, the couple's legal team provided information to show they weren't in Florida at the time of this alleged incident back in 2015. That reporting from that time indicates Jay-Z was actually making an appearance at NYU, and then he and Beyoncé went on vacation in Hawaii, with the Daily Mail back in the day publishing photos of them together there. So I want to bring in right now Long Crime's legal counsel, Elizabeth Vulai, to talk more about this. She is so generous with her time because Long Crime, we have so many legal issues we got to talk about, but she's been following these cases. So Elizabeth, thank you so much. So is this why they were dropped from this amended complaint? It feels intentional. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great point. So, like you mentioned, it's been reported that Jay-Z's attorney Alex Spiro has provided evidence and has been in touch with plaintiff's counsel, providing proof, saying, you know, there's photos of them in Hawaii. There's reporting that Jay-Z was at an event in New York for NYU, and the plaintiff is claiming that these incidents happened in early April. So, if you can provide concrete evidence, specifically photographic evidence, that they weren't even in Miami or anywhere near the area at the time.
The most powerful, respected, silent force in the music world. She broke her silence. And when she spoke, it wasn't with tweets, press statements, or performative statements. It was with purpose, with conviction, with clarity. She revealed Diddy's darkest moments. The world listened. And Diddy snapped. Let's rewind. The trial was already ugly. Testimonies, leaked evidence, whispers of late-night parties, manipulation, abuse. But there was always a question hanging in the air. Where are the heavy hitters? Where are the embodied truths from people who have the power to crush rumors with their words? Then it all shifted. Suddenly, Beyoncé, who has remained deliberately behind the curtain for decades, stood up and said, "I know. I saw. I stayed silent too long." Those words destroyed his defense. Sources say she never planned to go public.
A little bit with other lines that were included in this particular charge, but it seems like that was the biggest thing from both sides to really kind of hammer out here.
That's a problem for the defense, because that was one of their arguments. They even made it yesterday during their Rule 29 motion. Hey, these people weren't, prostitutes. He was paying them for their time and experience. Well, now it doesn't matter. If he transported them, and in the end, right, there was a commercial sex act, there was an act of prostitution, that's a big win for the prosecution right there. Real quick, before we just wrap things up on some of these finer points, would you say generally your view was the language is more beneficial to the prosecution at the end of the day than it was for the defense?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. I feel like it could go either way because I'm just always thinking of it in layman's terms. These are lawyers and very well-experienced lawyers at that, where they may say, okay, this language is very clear-cut. A jury will understand that. And jurors are very smart. That I will say that for sure. But in terms of just how this will all be read after hours and hours of closing arguments, I'm kind of wondering, okay, will this all click with the jury that this means this and this means that? But we'll have to wait and see what their reaction is once they ultimately sit down, get those closing arguments, and then get those instructions before they go into that room and deliberate.
And there was more parts that were debated between the attorneys and the judge. There was about language about what immunity is and what implicit bias is. There was also this thing about not having the G in government capitalized. The defense probably didn't want that. I don't know. Maybe it gives the government more authority. I don't know why they didn't really want that. That was interesting. But then right before they wrapped up court, there was this whole back and forth, right, between the prosecution and the defense about closing arguments. And when the defense's closing argument that's going to be delivered by Mark Agnifilo, when can he begin? What happened there?
Yeah, so it was kind of at that final moment. I think a lot of us were just antsy to get out of the courtroom. And then Alexandra Shapiro stands up. She's like, Your Honor, I have just one more thing. And so she actually asked the judge on behalf of Mark Agnifilo, who he wasn't present during this particular hearing. However, his client, Sean Combs, was. But he wasn't here at this hearing, mainly because he's preparing for closing arguments. Now, the ask was to move the defense's closings to Friday morning and begin on Friday. But what ended up happening is the government objected to this. They were like, I think this is just the defense kind of trying to play chess here, and that they were trying to get extra time to prepare for their closing arguments, and they don't want to waste the jury's time by only bringing them in for half a day. And so what they ended up doing is they're going to move closings just a little bit later tomorrow. I think they're going to start around maybe 10 o'clock-ish. They'll do 2 hours. We'll take a lunch break, and this will be the government first starting off. They'll do 2 hours of their summations. We'll have a lunch break. The government will finish their summations, and then likely the jury will be able to go home hopefully early in the afternoon. Then the defense will come back on Friday, do their summations, and the government will have about an hour for rebuttal, then the jury instructions, and then possibly deliberations might still begin on Friday. It seems like from both sides, they didn't want to waste the jury's time because especially with the 4th of July holiday coming up just next week, I think timing was really important to both sides, but it seems like
her team wanted to keep it quiet, whatever it was. But when whispers turned into public allegations and support shifted to survivors, she made a choice. She stepped forward, and when she did, it wasn't vague. It wasn't strategic ambiguity. It was raw. It was specific. It was unshakable. The private gatherings, the power plays, the misuse of influence, she didn't just imply them. She described them. She said she was invited to creative sessions, cocktail parties, late-night hangouts. She said there were quiet instructions from staff to keep your eyes down, to laugh when told, to thank the host even if you felt small. She said she saw doors close behind her in a hallway, then heard voices in the next room that made her freeze. She said she watched rumors ripple out the next day, changing the way people talked, the projects that happened, and the ones that died in whispers. She said artists disappeared, collaborators vanished.
Still believes he can prove that this happened, and he may want to call LeBron James and Gloria Estefan as witnesses. And by the way, Emilio, Gloria's husband, is named as a defendant, by the way, claims that he enabled Sean Combs' sex trafficking of Manzaro. So it seems like he's going full steam ahead, saying this happened and they have a part of this, they're a part of this too.
Yeah, he's definitely going full steam ahead. And I think the key thing about him still leaving Gloria Estefan as a witness is that, like you mentioned, Emilio Estefan is a defendant. So he's alleging that he engaged in wrongdoing. Whereas with Jay-Z and Beyonce, all he was alleging was that they were witnesses and this is what they saw. So I'm not surprised that he's still moving forward and still keeping in, Emilio and Gloria, obviously referenced heavily within the complaint, Gloria just as a witness. I was still a little surprised that he did leave LeBron James within the complaint because from what I see, he's just an apparent witness. I don't think he alleged any sort of wrongdoing against him.
No.
He wasn't named as
Yeah.
a defendant. And I believe his attorney made some sort of statement that he might not have been in Miami at the time, that he was playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I was kind of surprised he left him in there, but I wasn't surprised that he was still moving full steam ahead with the complaint.
Yeah, I'll get to those statements in a minute because they are quite telling as well. The interesting part about this is how are celebrities going to fight these subpoenas to testify if this case progresses?
Yeah, so assuming this case progresses that far, let's say to a trial, I don't think it will. But if it does, it is hard to negate or fight against a subpoena. There's different ways that you can do it. You can say, for a lot of people, they will say, the subpoena poses an undue burden, whether it's, in terms of my time or my resources or other things I have going on in my life. A lot of people also claim the burden of travel if you're required to travel a very far distance to come to court to testify. I think that's probably going to be a hard claim to make with, again, celebrities that have an excessive amount of wealth and privilege and things like that. So if it does progress this far, and if they are called to testify and it could be shown that they were in fact possibly at this incident and that it occurred and they witnessed something, I think it would be really hard to fight against that.
Elizabeth, this development makes me think about this lawsuit in general. And as I mentioned, we broke it down here on Sidebar whenever it came out 2 weeks ago or so. But here's the thing, it makes me wonder the strength of it, because talking generally about this lawsuit, a few days ago, Combs' legal counsel released a statement saying, "This complaint demonstrates the depraved lengths plaintiffs will travel to garner headlines in pursuit of a payday. No sane person reading this complaint could credit this story. Mr. Combs looks forward to having his day in court where these lies and the perverse motives of those who told them will be revealed." And that is very consistent with how he has been denying almost all of the allegations, or all of the allegations in the civil lawsuits that he's been facing. And of course, he's facing criminal charges, has been denying them as well. Looking forward to his day in court to fight those. But I have to say, Elizabeth, after reading this suit,
Assistants quit. And she admitted something that hit the loudest. She had the power to say something, but she didn't. She stayed silent because she trusted the system. She believed that his reputation and her silence could protect her career and the people she loved. She said she was wrong, and now she's determined to help fix it. That was her message. No dramatics, just truth. And when it hit the internet, it felt like a bomb. Fans watched old interviews, rewound concert footage, picked apart paparazzi photos. Something about her tone, her posture, the way she spoke, felt final. People said they still can't believe it's her. Others said it was exactly what was needed. Something broke. A boundary was crossed. Not just for Diddy, but for an entire industry. And let me tell you, inside the courtroom, he broke. Hard. You could hear the crack in his voice as he saw those words, felt the betrayal, couldn't handle facing it. He started shouting, yelling, calling for his lawyers, trying to recover control. But she held the room, and he collapsed. What followed happened fast. Social media caught fire. Queen Speaks started trending. Side-by-sides of her performance footage and those hush night scenes spread like wildfire. Commentators revisited conspiracy theories. Are we seeing the unraveling of Diddy's power? Cryptic posts from collaborators, reshares of deleted Diddy-era photos. Every brand that ever licensed music froze their campaigns. Every mogul who once lined up saw what was happening and stepped away. Inside record labels, it was panic.
Transferred to defendant's Diddy mansion. So that's going to become a question if in fact their mansions are close enough for this to even happen, and whether there is evidence of this underground tunnel or this tunnel of some sort. Quote, "Upon regaining partial consciousness, the plaintiff found himself inside a large party area upon information and belief that it was Diddy's son's birthday party. Jay-Z and Beyoncé Knowles Carter were seated in the room, And upon seeing plaintiff, Beyoncé Knowles Carter asked, "What's this? What's this all about? Why is this half-naked white man with a blank mask standing here in front of me?" Defendant Eric responded, "Diddy wants him to see what we do to snitches. This is part of his punishment." Plaintiff was forcefully paraded through multiple rooms filled with people who were jeering and taunting him. Defendant Diddy explicitly ordered plaintiff's degradation, stating, "He's going to find out what we do to snitches tonight. Get him undressed." So from there, Manzaro claims he was stripped, put in a shower, forcibly washed by two women while Mejias and Rivera watched, and then was outfitted in a thong, a black leather mask with a lock over his mouth, and then, quote, subjected to degrading and non-consensual acts at the direction of defendants Diddy and Adria. Plaintiff was sexually assaulted and forced to partake in unwanted sexual activity. And then he claims he passed out. Now, from there, he claims he woke up, found himself locked in a dark side room. Adria English and Mejias come in. They dress him, take him off the property, and then enters Jacob Arabo, also known as Jacob the Jeweler. You probably know who he is. Quote, while still semi-conscious, plaintiff encountered Jacob Arabo, who is visibly disturbed upon seeing plaintiff in his forced attire. He asked, "What's this? What's going on with this guy? Why is he standing here staring at me with a penis strapped to his face?" Defendant Eric responded, "Oh, he's just some guy who's a snitch. We're teaching him a little lesson." Defendant Emilio intervened, instructing Defendant Eric and Bonnie Rivera to move the plaintiff out of Jacob Arabo's sight. Gloria Estefan again pleaded for an ambulance to be called, but Defendant Emilio silenced her and shoved her into the crowd. Upon leaving the event, plaintiff overheard Defendant Diddy ask Defendant Eric, "You're going to be getting rid of him, right?" To which Defendant Eric responded, "Yeah, I'll be taking care of that." Following this described freak-off event, Manzaro claims he was taken back to that house where he claims he was originally kept. He was savagely beaten and then left for dead inside of his own apartment. When a gang member later inquired about how plaintiff was kept unconscious, Defendant Eric responded, "Xylazine, trank." Now, again, I have to say, I struggle with the question of how he knew that this was allegedly said. Did he overhear it? Okay, that's a possibility, but could he through these alleged beatings and druggings? And that's going to be, I imagine, a difficulty for him in pursuing this case. Now, Manzaro claims as a result of all of this, he suffered physical injuries, internal trauma, groin damage, sexual maiming, hernias, and he claims he can prove this through documented evaluations from a urologist and a surgeon. But then Manzaro alleges that Eric Mejias would continue to harass and intimidate him in the years following this attack, including issuing death threats and threats to kidnap Manzaro's son. And Manzaro believes that this was all to keep him quiet. And he even claims that surveillance footage and police reports confirm attempts by Mejias to approach Manzaro's property.
Inside agents' offices, crisis whispers. Sponsors formally suspended ties. The Hollywood pipeline hesitated. He was radio silence from previously loyal allies. One after another, people distanced themselves. The Guardian reported on hush deals being revisited. Deadline talked about executives rethinking lineage after Beyoncé bomb. Variety said the story now reaches legacy. Of course, no major outlet went so far as to say, "We told you so." But the energy was there. Legally, though, the case pivoted when Beyoncé testified. Witnesses say the entire structure of his defense began hanging on shards of doubt. Was everything he built really by merit? Or was it by fear, by whisper networks, by unspoken leverage? Her testimony expanded the scope beyond individual cases. It turned this trial into a system-wide reckoning, and for the judge, that may have mattered more than anything else. Remember, prosecutorial strategy often hinges on how a defendant behaves, not just what they did. Diddy unraveling in court, pointing fingers, flipping tables. Yesterday, it might have been shrugged off. Today, those actions seem filtered through the lens of someone confronting ultimate exposure. And with Beyoncé's testimony framing a system of suppression, the court now has to examine those systems too. Fans are already debating in comment sections. Is she the tipping point? Will this be remembered as the moment silence ended? Because look, attorneys are already talking about new charges, fresh investigations, subpoenaing more insiders. Suddenly, the case is bigger than the courtroom. It's bigger than music. It's career-defining for Beyoncé. And if the next wave of lawsuits comes in, well, those are now sealed under both legal precedent and social license. For Diddy, this isn't just legal jeopardy. It's existential. He's lost his narrative control. He's losing his empire.
Violence and coercion. The second cause of action is human trafficking, but this one is against Eric Mejias for his alleged role in drugging, transporting, and harboring Manzaro for purposes of sexual exploitation. Third, human trafficking against Brendan Paul, namely that he was allegedly an active participant in luring Manzaro into an environment where he would be drugged, transported, and sexually exploited. Fourth, human trafficking against Emilio Estefan. So how's he on the hook? Well, the complaint reads, defendant was a key enabler of plaintiff's trafficking, using his influence, resources, and industry connections to facilitate and conceal the human trafficking enterprise led by defendant Diddy. Defendant knowingly allowed, facilitated, and provided locations for the trafficking of plaintiff where he was subjected to non-consensual sexual acts, forced servitude, and humiliation. Defendant provided security personnel, financial backing, and logistical support to ensure that trafficking victims had no means of escape and remained under the control of the trafficking network. Victims, plural. That's interesting. Fifth, human trafficking violations against Adria English, alleging defendant was a key recruiter and enforcer responsible for luring vulnerable individuals, plural, including plaintiff, into environments where they were exploited for sexual purposes. Six, we have kidnapping under federal and state law against Eric Mejias, namely that he illegally seized, confined, restrained Manzaro against his will, deprived him of liberty, that he used physical force, threats, and coercion to do so, and transported Manzaro across state lines or across the state, which is an element of the federal claim. Count 7, obstruction of justice, witness tampering against Sean Combs. The allegation being, quote, defendant individually and in concert with others engaged in a deliberate and sustained campaign of intimidation, threats, and coercion aimed at preventing plaintiff from testifying truthfully and providing evidence against him and concealment to suppress plaintiff's ability to testify or report crimes. And also, the alleged use of the word snitch to describe Manzaro is key to support that claim. Count 8, same claim of obstruction of justice, witness tampering against Mejias this time, goes back to those allegations of death threats, kidnapping his son, allegedly trying to come on Manzaro's property, all as a way to apparently keep him silent. 9, obstruction of justice, witness tampering against Brendan Paul. Now, this one's interesting because he claims that Paul engaged in a campaign of intimidation and threats and interfered with Manzaro's ability to get medical treatment, and that he, quote, facilitated the intimidation of witnesses and suppressing evidence. Now, I would say, and by the way, this goes to all of the causes of action, you will see immediately motions to dismiss under Rule 12b-6 being filed, which essentially says that if you look at everything that's alleged in this complaint, you take all the facts as true, they don't state viable legal claims for which the law provides a remedy. That here for obstruction or sex trafficking or kidnapping, that what's being alleged doesn't match the elements of those claims. That is classic in any litigation. And I just point that out because, again, the lack of specificity and a clear narrative or explanation at times could be an issue, particularly how Brendan Paul engaged in all of this obstruction. I mean, was that properly laid out in the statement of facts? Maybe, maybe not. 10, we have obstruction, witness tampering against Emilio Estefan, leveling the same allegations like Brendan Paul. 11, obstruction, witness tampering against Adria English, leveling the same allegations like Paul and Estefan. 12, we have racketeering against all the defendants under federal and state law. So this is about a criminal enterprise.
He's losing the industry he built when Beyoncé is standing there with no PR machine attached. She's got influence. She's got fans. She's got a military of loyalists ready to amplify every word. And in that moment, she became something else entirely. A reckoning. The question now, what does he do next? Legal experts say any motion to suppress her testimony or appeal, it is a dangerous gamble. Denouncing Beyoncé is a PR nightmare. Attempting to spin this away will dig the hole deeper. Anything he does now paints a new ripple, and the next one could finish the job. Are we now on a path where no celebrity, no matter how powerful, can survive this kind of exposure, especially when someone like Beyoncé speaks? Is the industry on notice? Are brands going to require conduct clauses, deeper vetting, personal behavior audits? This could ripple beyond one trial, beyond one man. It might restructure how stardom functions in a culture that no longer tolerates silence in the face of evidence. And at the root of it all, people are watching. They're ready to see if Beyoncé's voice sparks a shift, if justice comes faster, if walls come down. Because society is tired of hearing power protect itself behind contracts, lawyers, silence, and hush money. We're ready to see it go public. We're ready to ask harder questions. We're ready to see what happens to someone who once believed they were untouchable, and then met someone who refused their silence. Diddy's meltdown wasn't just dramatic. It revealed fear. It showed an empire cracking at the edges. And the exposure of Beyoncé's voice isn't just damaging to him, it's a reckoning, a turning point. A message that silence can be broken. And that when it is, entire worlds shift. We're in one of those moments now. And it's anyone's guess how it ends. Let me know what you think. Did Beyoncé just end a generation of silence? Do you expect more heavyweights to speak? And is Diddy's empire now finished? Or can he come back from this? The new world is watching. Your thoughts matter now more than ever.